I'm Santiago. I'm a second-year PhD student on NYU on the Center for Cybersecurity. And today I'll be talking about PolyPasswordHasher. Today I'm going to cover the topic this way. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem, what's offline password cracking. For those who don't know, I'll cover this really quickly and give you a background on it. Then I'll tell you some insight on how did we realize we could rethink the way that passwords are stored and come up with a better system. Then I'll explain what is this insight. Finally, I'll elaborate on how the system works. And then we'll talk a little bit about how well it works and how it's currently implemented, right? Now, the problem. All of these logos that you see here have something in common. Well, many things in common. Probably they all have a server. Maybe all of them have an accounts. And also, all of them have been hacked at some point and their password databases released or stolen. Luckily, sadly, we have 65 million servers running WordPress. And at the beginning of the year, for example, there was an SQL injection vulnerability that pretty much left all of these sites open. That is a really big portion of the internet. It only takes one vulnerability. Now, luckily, we have password hashing. That means that hackers usually can't reverse the passwords as they are stored. They need to do something that we call password cracking. Password cracking is pretty much just guessing. However, hackers have access to really strong pieces of hardware that can guess really fast. Actually, they can guess at rates that are on the ranges of millions or billions. That's the equivalent of reading Tolstoy's War and Peace in less than a second. Now, that's the reason why when the LinkedIn database was stolen, 60% of the passwords were cracked 2 weeks after the breach. And just a couple of weeks ago, Last.fm was hacked, and 43 million accounts were cracked. The 90% of the 43 million accounts were cracked under 2 hours, provided they had a really weak hashing scheme, but still, that's impressive, right? Now, the insight is that before this, we had the assumption that verification was equivalent to the cost of guessing. This is, if a server can verify passwords in, say, 10 milliseconds, then an attacker can guess hundreds or thousands of passwords each second. We also have that the users pick really weak passwords, as Natalie brought up. Then as the guesses increase, then we need more passwords or better passwords, or we need to make hashes slower and increase the processing time for the server. This limitation was thought of fundamental. We used to think that an attacker with the same hardware as the server will guess at the same exact rate. We assumed that attackers and legitimate servers were equivalent. However, it turns out this limitation is not fundamental because, as many people would have guessed if they stood behind for a second, is that attackers are really not like servers. And the cost of verification can be made so that the cost of guessing be incredibly lower than the cost of guessing. Our insight is really simple. Attackers usually have a really low success rate when they're guessing. That is expected, right? And whereas servers that get legitimate passwords from legitimate users, they usually get the correct passwords at the first or second attempt from all of the users. Now, how can we use this to build a system that's incredibly resilient to offline password cracking? Now, here I have a padlock. If you have to guess every single dial, and you could check if every single dial is correct separately, then you would probably guess the combination of this padlock in about 30 guesses. The reality is that all of the dials in the padlock are interconnected. This means that these 30 guesses are really probably like 1,000. That's an increase in a significant number and a little bit, and more than a 10-fold increase. And this is only by making 3 dials interrelate. How can we translate this to the field of passwords? Well, What we do is we make password checking interdependent as the dials of a padlock. This means that cracking a password that usually takes 1,000 guesses, like Hard 66 on the ROCU list, would take about 1 billion guesses if we interrelate 3 passwords together. Now, how do we build this? The idea is really simple, and I'll start talking about how hackers usually crack passwords. This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but this can be really expanded to how things work in the field. Think of a line. We have a line here. Maybe you have something like the number line. You start with a 1 here, and then it goes to infinity. We only take positives. And hackers usually know, and they can translate this into actual popularities of the passwords, right? We have on your left-hand side 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a password that appears about 1% of the time in all databases. Remember this number, it will come handy later. And then you have passwords that occur least frequently. I'm doing jumps of 100. So if I, for example, have picked the password gatito, which is a cat in Spanish, then an attacker will take about 700 guesses, and he'll be successful to this, right? Now, this is because the attacker knows which line to walk. The attacker knows how to walk down and how to check every individual password. But what if we made the walking down the line a little bit harder? And that's what we do with PolyPasswordHasher. We add another dimension, and now the attacker doesn't really know which direction to walk. In reality, we come up with a more complicated line than the horizontal line that you saw before. Now, which line do we pick? Well, we pick a line that really falls on the passwords that we picked or the users picked for themselves. So if we have Dolphins, Gatito, and Cassandra, and Friends1, only those passwords fall in the line. And the attacker has no way to know this unless they know the line. For the people that are really geeky, this is a secret sharing system with an hyperplane and a threshold of whatever, right? Now, for an attacker, it looks like this. And there's really no way to tell this. Now, how do we leverage this? How do we translate this into, or how do we build a password storage mechanism that uses this principle? Well, PolyPasswordHasher just uses 4 functions. The first 3 of them, you may guess what they are. It's initializing a store, which is installing the system. Then you have to create some accounts so you can check them. And then you can check those accounts to see if people can log in. And finally, we have an operation called bootstrapping, which is the new mysterious thing that we're adding. Now, initializing a store is pretty much coming up with a number when you start your database. This line here is going to be our secret line. And we store it in a place that's usually hard for an attacker to reach. Usually this is main memory. Why? Because we've made some research, and it turns out that 60% to 80% of the password breaches do not really reach main memory. Most of them are SQL injections or people physically stealing a backup. Now, when we have this line, and if you remember your geometry classes, all of these coordinates, or all of the points in the line, have an XY value. We will use these XY values to relate them to passwords. This, in, again, geek talk, this is called a share. Each share will correspond to an account once we create accounts. When we create accounts, we do what is done today in the industry to create accounts, is to store passwords. This is called a salted password hash, and we'll perform an operation with the share. The share will, in turn, this operation will take the XY coordinate and bump it out of the line. Now, with this value here, we will perform checking passwords. Once we do this, we obtain what our data values will be. This is called share XOR hashes. When we want to check if a password is correct and we have a value that's outside of the line in the database, we can take the password from the user and perform the reverse operation, which is actually the reciprocal. This will, if this succeeds, then we get our point back. And since we have the line, we know if the password is correct. If someone gives us the wrong password, then there's no mathematical way to make this share XOR hash fall back into the line. And that's simple. So far, we have provided a system that works. Now, I'll have to explain this other operation, which is the one that distinguishes attackers from servers. We have a line. We have a bunch of points that do not fall on the line. And we don't store the line in a place that the attacker can reach. I'll pause here for a second and show that, ask you people to try to connect the dots here or try to find a line that would make sense. And that's life for the attacker now. It's just a bunch of disjoint points in the space and many possibilities of what is actually correct. It's no longer a horizontal walk down the road kind of thing. Now, for the server, however, if this is in main memory, this line could also be lost. Luckily, the server has the help from the users. This is like putting an encryption key inside of the mind of each of the users of the system so that when you need to recover the line, it's as simple as just connecting the dots. This is an operation that for a server is going to be really cheap. And this is an operation that, as I'll show you later, for an attacker will take many, many, many years to figure out. Now, I'm going to make a little pause, cover some of the benefits of just doing this wacky little thing with a password storage. For the attacker doing this, he'll have to make guesses in the same way as we make guesses in a padlock. This means that K, which is a parameter that you choose when you install the system, you will have to make K correct guesses in one shot. For a server, however, with help from the users, it's just waiting for K users. This starts building the differentiating factor between servers and attackers. We also have part of what made the title of the slide. We have the benefit that you cannot crack any single password if you don't have the line. This means that even if you choose a bad password, the security of the system can still provide you with the same benefits as everyone else. Of course, if all of the users pick good passwords, and we'll explore that later, you have a system that really doesn't let anyone behind. Now, we came up with this idea. We implemented it. It turns out it's really easy to implement. Most of our implementations, we have 7 of them, were less than 1,000 lines of code, so you could code this maybe in a weekend. Depending how much you like coding. And we have 7 implementations right now. Actually, one of the implementations was made during the summer by a high school student of ours. That's the Node, the JavaScript implementation. We're trying to turn this into a full passport module, so you can install this in your Node.js application. We also deployed a Django application that's added to one of the beta servers at NYU in one of the projects that we have, and also at CSS. And this also gathers some industry attention. We've had people from, it hit the front page of Slashdot, Hacker News, also Login had a featured article on it. We also had the collaboration from other, well, not companies, but open source people trying to integrate this into their systems. Of course, this is all open source. You could browse to our website that I'll show you later. Anyway, so we have a system. We build it. Now, how well does it really perform? Well, this graph here, you'll see on this side of the screen, there's a green area. This green area shows you where the usual error rate for the server falls. As you see, verification for a server is under seconds. And this is only done the first time when you have to recover the line. Once you have the line, this is actually cheaper than verifying a hash as it is right now. However, and the screen is not big enough, so I'll zoom there. On the other side of the screen, you have a zoomed-in version of this. That red bar that you see there, that's where the attacker usually falls. This is if the attacker knew that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 was 1% of the passwords in the database, and he's trying to find them. That's actually the better strategy for the attacker. And as you see, if you choose a good K value, you can actually make the attacker take millennia to crack these passwords. I'm going to go to another example. This is to compare against regular salted password hashing. That's the industry standard today. There's 3 lines. Well, there's 2 lines. You cannot see the third one. That's outside of the axis. The red line on the bottom, that's regular salted password hashing. If you have a random password of 6, we are using nest entropy for this experiment, it would take under an hour to crack the password. Using a k of 2, this means that 2 people have to provide their password to recover the line. You would make the same cracker at the same rate. This is 1 billion hashes per second. This is really fast. Take about 1 million years to crack the whole database. And the third line would take about 1.25 10 to the 19 CPU years to crack. And just to give you a hold of how much this really is, that's if every single computer was able to compute hashes at 1 billion hashes per second, it would take approximately the estimated age of the universe to crack the passwords. I also want to simplify things. I don't think logarithmic scales really tell us the whole story about this. And since we're on the topic of the Colossus, I will try to see how really colossal this is, right? So if this red line here was a 6 feet tall person on the password length of 7 random characters as a password, then not even the sun would reach the green line that you see above. Actually, not even the biggest star known to mankind will reach the green line that you see above. It would actually take you 100 times the diameter of the largest star known to mankind to just actually touch it. In reality, it's 108 times, but it's not as nice. Anyway, the conclusion is, first of all, this is a different approach to password hashing that actually provides different benefits and really invites us to rethink the way that we're storing passwords. This experiment was mostly of, can we provide a symmetry in the effort on how attackers and defenders perform when checking and guessing passwords? You can try PolyPasswordHasher today. It's for Django, C, Python, Ruby, Java, Node. You can find it on our website. And it's an open invitation. Please take a look.
So have you talked to any commercial vendors about using this?
We've approached Vault, which is a system that does secure information storage, and they have like a really well-thought code base for storing securely information and providing like different layers of authentication and permissions and all of this. They do use similar cryptographic primitives. They are actually waiting for us to do an official proposal. We also were approached by some people at the National Geographic Society, and they wanted to make an implementation and us, again, providing a complete proposal so they could integrate their systems. Not in a really official way, it was more of a, like, can we hack this together, right? Yeah, I think those were like the major things that we have.
Do you think it's robust enough now for commercial use?
I think it's robust enough for commercial use, yes. I didn't talk about some of the extensions, but we are being really sober, especially when you're thinking about sensitive things such as password storage and all of this. The community usually is really skeptical about new ideas because sometimes it ends up in snake oil. I do think it's robust with all of the extensions that we added. For example, here in this really simple model, an attacker could try to make you land on the left side of the screen and then you're DDoSed, right? Or an attacker that can create an arbitrary number of accounts could actually create all of those accounts, then recombine the line, and then you're back to password hashing, right? We have thought of extensions that we have in our implementations that do take care of this little edge cases. With all of those extensions added, I'm really confident about the performance of this.
Did you publish this in an IEEE or ACM journal or a conference?
No. Well, it is on the Usenix login magazine. That's the most close to an academic. It's, I think, the third 2014 issue, like December.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about how you store your line and where it gets stored persistently? And also, Can you use a multidimensional line like a plane or an n-dimensional surface instead of just a line?
Yes, those are two questions. What we do, for example, in the Django implementation, just to ground up the more context, is we replace the hasher, and the hasher is just a layer in the web app, and it expects $sign delimited fields. We just replace what is the usual password hash with what we call the share XOR hash. We have another 1-byte field. That's the share number. And the rest is the salt for the salted hash, and what you would imagine in an etc password file. It's really not so different. On the multidimensional aspect, yes, this is explicitly related to Shamir secret sharing. It could be thought of as a line in a finite field, or it could be thought of as a hyperplane. There's all other sharing schemes that we can use and we have explored. There's error-correcting sharing schemes that do have different properties. They are sometimes more taxing on the attacker, but also a little bit more taxing on the server, depending on how you configure this. And we have also explored share-selectable secret sharing schemes, which are also like in other mathematical domain. And they could let us stretch the secret recombination time in the same way that key stretching works with password hashing today. Does that answer your question?
Might be showing my ignorance, but on behalf of our Sergeant Major, I'd just like to know: do you think have you wondered or pondered if it's more or less resistant to quantum computing, quantum cryptography?
Sorry, could you repeat the last part?
Is it more or less resistant to quantum computing?
I think I would take that offline. I don't think it's more or less resistant, but I would have to get some more context on how would this affect. I think it would also fall apart in as many other types of cryptography. But we could find other primitives that could fit well in the same approach in that sense. My intuition tells me that we are not really married to these two cryptographic primitives, Shamir secret sharing and salted hashing. For example, if someone says, I want to key stretch my hashes, well, you can totally do that. You can use Argon 2 if you want to. And I don't want to use Shamir secret sharing because it's not quantum safe. Okay, fine. Although I think Shamir secret sharing is information theoretically secure, but I don't know if that makes it any better against quantum cryptography. I would have to dig it up a little bit more.
Sure, thank you.